Good morning friends and welcome back to NPTEL online certification course on public speaking. My dear friends, last week we discussed interviews and I am quite hopeful that by this time most of you might either be waiting for or might have appeared at interviews, and many of you also might have got jobs. But one of my students who has recently joined a very famous organization, when asked about his experiences, told me in a very low spirited voice, "Sir, there are so many meetings and sometimes these meetings continue till late." Dear friends, I have titled today's lecture as Meeting Management, and we are going to talk about the importance of meetings, their requirements and also their significance for you as a public speaker who too have at times either to participate in quite a good number of meetings or to address several meetings, conduct several meetings. One has to remember the fact that meetings today have become very much significant. Fine? And it is actually meetings through which we come to know about many new things. We also come to know about new plannings, and we also come to see how certain decisions could not be taken without a proper meeting. Now, you might all be eager enough to know why meetings are so important, why life could not have been as easy without meetings. So, let us take some experiences and some quotes from some books. One of them by Anthony J, who in his book How to Run a Meeting, what he says is, meetings fulfill a deep human need. Man is a social species. In every organization and every human culture of which we have record, people come together in small groups at regular and frequent intervals, and in larger tribal gatherings from time to time. If there are no meeting in places where people work, their attachment to their work would be less and people would meet in societies, clubs or pubs when work was over. What do we come to discover out of this? That without meetings we do not feel a sense of attachment to our vocation, to our job. Another important experience that George David Kiefer shares in his book The Strategy of Meetings, he says meetings are the fulcrum. Fine, look at the word, meetings are the fulcrum, the axis I mean, the central nervous system of an information society, the center stage for personal performance. Now, after this lecture, you will understand how meetings are very much important. But then we must also try to understand what actually are the purposes of a meeting. We have in one of the lectures, while we are discussing group discussions, we could find that group discussion was also a form of discussion. It was just like meeting, but there are certain differences that we shall also deliberate upon. Now, the purposes of meeting are to share information and issues, to generate new ideas, to exchange ideas and experiences, and to arrive at a widely acceptable decision. You will find that in a meeting, just like in a group discussion, we have certain dual roles. One role as the chairman of a meeting, as a person who conducts the meeting, and the other is that of a participant. So, one of the purposes of meetings is to communicate information to a group. Imagine you are the CEO or the head of a particular unit. You actually have to discuss new ideas from time to time, and in case there is a complex situation and you need to arrive at some resolution or some sort of decision you are going to take, naturally you go for a meeting. Sometimes in order to resolve certain conflicts, either internal or external, you actually also call a meeting, and in meetings you will find that it is actually a face-to-face meeting of a particular unit of people who actually, with the help of certain demonstrations, sometimes you have to demonstrate when you are trying to persuade your people about a new project or a new proposal or an innovative effort or whatsoever you are going to take or your organization is going to take, because the main motto is to impress upon your colleagues. Now, what actually are the functions of a meeting and what is expected of you as a participant in the meeting? Meetings actually help all of us develop a sort of team spirit, because the focus may shift from individual aspiration and concerns of the employees to the broader goal and vision of the organization at large. What do we want to do in another 10 years from now? I mean planning. Meetings also help us generate group culture, because nowadays organizations have people from different cultures, different countries, different languages, different backgrounds. So, their experiences are pulled in and shared among the members. You are enriching each other. Sometimes you will find that certain collective purposes and focuses are also clarified. In meetings, one can also come across that how status is also demonstrated. Meetings actually serve to showcase the position, influence, expertise, knowledge and authority of the participants during the process of interaction. That is why an entry level employee in the beginning feels himself quite lost. He comes to know many people at certain positions, fine, and then meetings also helps serve the imperative human need of socializing. What if there were no meetings? What if people won't be able to talk to each other, mix with each other? So, meeting actually provides you with this sort of facility where you feel to make your acquaintances with other and you communicate with them in order to know certain things. Now, meetings can be properly organized, it can be badly organized. You will find that sometimes the meetings are very, just before any notification and just on the spot there can be a meeting, that is called emergency meeting. When some critical juncture is there, we have to call a meeting. But most of the meetings are organized, and for that notices are given well ahead of time, and it actually gives every individual or member or participant to think of if they come to know about the agenda of the meeting. That is why when a notice for the meeting is given, the agenda is also attached. But if there is an unplanned meeting, fine, sometimes we have also to have a sort of unplanned meeting, but that is only during critical junctures. And in unplanned meetings you can come across several digressions, fine, we do not stick to the agenda, we may not be able to take some effective decision or results. Now, for a successful meeting to be managed, we actually require a sort of process, we can call that the process cycle. Meaning thereby, as a person who has called the meeting and all those who are going to attend the meeting, one question that needs to be mulled over is, why are we going to have this meeting? What could be the outcome of this meeting? Takeaway, isn't it? So, unless and until we have done a proper homework about the meeting, because finally we have to reach either a consensus or to a sort of difference. So, that is why when we plan a meeting well ahead of time, we actually provide a proper agenda. So, we need to understand the purpose, the outcomes, the steps that can be taken, and people especially at the lofty positions, they think of the steps that will be taken. These steps are already in their minds, but they simply want to take the acceptance and the consensus of others, fine, because they know who can have what sort of capability, and finally based on the feedback then we come to a sort of decision. Now, what are the steps? The steps to be taken both before, during and after the meeting actually can help us reach the desired outcome. So, we should always try to ensure the fulfillment of both pre-meeting and post-meeting assignments. So, when you call a meeting, you have some pre-meeting agenda, and we must also see that if it is not going to have a sort of favorable opinion among the members, then what could be its outcome. Now, one must also decide who could be the part of the meeting, I mean capabilities, potentials. What actually should be the ground rules or behavior? Sometimes we are also provided with some ground rules. What are the resources required for conducting the meeting? And a sincere manager, a person who is future looking, always sees to it that who can be assigned which responsibility. And then after the meeting is over, and even before as well, one must also try to understand the criteria of evaluation of the meeting, what could be the proper outcomes, and then how the suggestions that have come out of this meeting can be implemented. Now, all of us at some point of time, as I have said earlier, that become a part of the meeting or become a person who is at the helm of affairs. So, one must also know what could be the roles in the meeting. There can be several persons who can have to play several roles. Life is full of roles, and each man in his capacity has to play some role. Chairperson, it is actually the person who can provide leadership for the meeting. Such a person actually gives a call for the meeting, states the purpose, provides the agenda, significance and expected outcomes. That is why when the notice comes, we will also see how notice is given and how agenda is prepared. So, he actually tries to build a climate for discussion, a proper ambience. Let there be an open dialogue so that we can come to a proper conclusion. And then as a group members are also roles. These roles are not like the roles that we have discussed in group discussions, where every individual has to play his part well. Here, collective responsibility for the success of the meeting has to be ensured. We also should see that we should keep ourselves to the schedule that has been defined. We must participate here, fine. We must participate and put forth our ideas. And one thing that is true both in GD as well as in meeting is that of effective listening. Listen to issues, subjects, discussion properly, and one must also be vigilant about the outcomes of the meeting. And finally, if a follow-up action, if a follow-up plan is to be taken, one must also ensure that one will have to participate not only as a participant, but also has to play a role or take the task which has been assigned to him. In meetings, you will find that there are some people who can record. In some meetings, we have a secretary who actually records or jots down. So, the person who records captures the basic idea of speakers visibly. You will also find that if there are certain ambiguous and vague ideas, so clarification is to be sought, fine, and the proceedings of the entire meeting. say for example, arguments, decisions, actions agreed upon, all these are recorded, and then after the meeting is over, sometimes it can be provided in the form of minutes. Now, there is another person who has one role as that of a facilitator. So, the facilitator applies the principles and techniques of the group process and also provides suggestions for as to how things can be improved during the meeting. Now, in certain meetings you will find that when a new person, say for example, an external resource person comes to tell us about some new product or about some new procedure, or somebody who is an expert, such people also can be invited to meetings in units, in small groups. Now, such people have a role to discover or to share their extensive research on the issues which are actually pertaining to the topic of the meeting. Suppose we want to go for a new thing in our unit or our department. So, before that we would like to hear from the concerned person about it. So, for example, if I am going to have a language lab in my department, naturally I would like to invite a person who is an expert in that and who knows well about the software and whatsoever, and then through that I would also like my group members to be familiar with, so that later it can be transferred to other people. So, such a person who is a resource person provides background information to the group when needed, and there can be clarifications, and in terms of certain complexities and ambiguities some clarification can be always sought. Then in every meeting there is a timekeeper, because as nowadays we have a flurry of meetings every now and then, and that is why we need to have sometimes short meetings. So, timekeeper actually assists the facilitator to keep a track of the schedule of various agenda items. Timekeeper also helps the group to start and end on time and to manage time during the meetings. But of course, when it is a long meeting, it becomes even very difficult for the timekeeper. And then there is an observer who does not participate that much, but he is simply an observer. He may be an external person, fine, but he presents a report after the meeting is over, he provides the conclusion of it. There is an administrator who ensures, the physical necessities, the acoustics, the venue, fine, the technical equipments, and also sees to it that people are properly treated with proper refreshments and all. Richard Dunsing in one of his observations says, you and I have simply got to stop meeting this way, when he says each meeting is a miniature management cycle, meaning thereby meeting is to be managed properly, and that is why we have titled this lecture as meeting management. Now, imagine that you are not only a participant, but in the years to come, when you grow, when you mature, you also may have to assume the role of a chairperson in the meeting. What could be your responsibilities? Anthony J., whom we have already referred to in the beginning from his book How to Run a Meeting, says, just as the driver of a car who has two tasks, to follow his route and to manage his vehicle, so the chairperson's job can be divided into two corresponding tasks. And what are these tasks? Dealing with the agenda items and dealing with the people. The chairman sees to it that every agenda item is to be developed, to be discussed, discussion be invited on that, light be thrown on that, and finally he sees to it what is actually the behavior of the people and how, because sometimes you may find people who might quite be opposed to some ideas, and when you want them to be induced to, or you want to persuade, as a chairman, it is your right to practice how you are going to deal with such people. Now, there are certain tasks before the meeting, pre-meeting. So, decide the agenda, ensure that the meetings are well planned with proper agenda items, and the agenda is to be provided much in advance so that people come prepared. Agenda items which actually include the items sequentially, where the chairperson can assign meeting roles even beforehand, who can be the facilitator, who can be the secretary, who can be the resource person, who can be the recorder, timekeeper, etc., etc. And when the meeting is over, only calling a meeting is not enough. The meeting not only has to be conducted, but the meeting should come with something very transparent, something very feasible, and the conclusions that are made that have to be implemented properly. So, review the meeting, whether it is successful or it only ended as a failure. Of course, the notes are there, but then on the basis of these notes, because one meeting is followed by another meeting, see to it that in the next meeting, sometimes some proposal is not accepted in the very first meeting. So, from the fallout of the first meeting, take the cues and improvise upon how things can be made possible, how views can be converted into favorable ones. Ensure that minutes are accurate, because they become a part of record. People often refer to, you might have seen at times the sort of pandemonium that is made in many meetings, and that is only because of the minutes where something has been recorded and people refer to that. Sometimes they bring newspaper clippings and they say that this happened in the past, and then this is actually a painful reminder. So, schedule next meeting pertaining to the topic at hand. Now, having set the agenda, you are now going to begin the meeting, isn't it? So, when you begin the meeting, at the first instance, let there be a proper, a warm atmosphere, ambience, so that every participant is encouraged. Promote a positive and amicable milieu, define the meeting objectives, and also define the roadmap. If you are talking about future, fine. So, define the roadmap and seek the suggestions of the members, mention the processes that could be used for decision making and conflict resolution. Now, while you are facilitating the meeting, so discussion on each item of the agenda, and see to it that meeting is actually oriented towards defined outcomes. Compliment the members from time to time. That's a wonderful idea, Mr. X, fine. Enforce the stated group agreements as needed, and in case there are digressions, you need to resolve them amicably, because as human beings, there are at times we can come across certain misunderstandings, and these misunderstandings can be clarified only through dialogues, only through talks, only through discourses. Now, when the meeting is to be concluded, see to it that things which have been resolved or discussed are summarized. One needs to reiterate, repeat the action plans and remind the timelines. If you have mentioned some timeline, deadline should not be deadline, rather it should be timeline. Applaud or praise the group on the work accomplished, discuss whether further meetings are required, and then define preliminary agenda of the next meeting. And also you can ask from time to time what would be the next meeting and when can we have the next meeting. In this regard, if you feel that a succession of some other meeting is also required. Now, as I had been saying that all of us have to at times call for a meeting, and all of us also are expected to participate in a meeting. But before that, did I not say that notice is to be given? And when you provide them the notice much in advance, fine. It's actually a written notice. Nowadays we provide it through emails, but that is also a written notice at least prior to a week from the date of the meeting. And then in the meeting, please mention specifically as to which date, what time, what venue, and if the agenda has been decided and it is not an emergency meeting, attach the agenda. Fine. So, the notice of the meeting should include certain things which are very important. Sometimes you may find people only knowing the date, but they forget the venue. That is why careful managers and CEOs just before the date of the meeting also send a sweet reminder about the meeting. So, the name or when you are going to write the notice, say to it that the name of the organization and also the date of the issuing, the date on the day of the meeting, then the time, venue, the business of the meeting, I mean the transactions which are actually provided in the form of agenda. And also because it is actually the job of the secretary, secretary not only gives the notice, it is also the job of the secretary to record the minutes in consultation with the chairman after the meeting is over. Now, how to prepare an agenda? Most of you, those who are experienced ones, have come across several notices and agendas, but especially for those who are new and want to call a meeting and want to draft an agenda, should say to it that the elements of the agenda actually include the purpose of the meeting, the expected outcomes of the meeting, the day, date, time and venue of the meeting, the schedule of the meeting, and then each item of the agenda. If you find that it is actually there is a succession of meetings, fine, you should number it 10 point, 10th meeting of a bar association, 10th meeting of academics, fine, whatsoever. And then agenda items will be 10.1, 10.2 like that, and in every meeting you will find that the first agenda item will be confirmation of the minutes of the last meeting. So, the purpose of the meeting agenda is actually to plan the meeting content, to define expected results, to conduct meeting in proper order and to ensure continuity in the proceedings, and finally to follow the schedule of the meeting. Now, when you are going to prepare for the agenda, see that they are provided in the increasing order of their importance. Of course, every agenda item is to be numbered, enumerated, and the first item will be confirmation of the minutes of the previous meeting or the last meeting, and the last item is always any other matter with the permission of the chair, fine. And mention the region for each topic on the agenda, put times on agenda items, I mean if it is a meeting of 1 hour or 30 minutes, so it is up to the secretary to decide how much time will be given to what, and this is actually a sort of reminder and it is a sort of outline which is being followed when the meeting is held, when the meeting is called upon. Now, there are certain things that one must take into consideration. Now, in this regard, let us take once again Anthony Jay's observations from how to run a meeting, where he says, the usual mistake is to make the agenda unnecessarily brief and vague. For example, the phrase development budget does not communicate much because it is not specific, whereas the longer expression to discuss the proposal for the reduction of the next year's development budget. Now, that the introduction of a new product has been postponed. So, this actually clarifies what actually is going to be the agenda item. It is always to be taken into consideration that no new item should be introduced 15 minutes prior to the lunch break or the winding up of meeting. It should also be seen that meeting lasts for 1 hour, sometimes it is longer, it goes up to 2 hours, because longer meetings nobody likes. Agenda items of high interest or high priority are to be given in the increasing order, and agenda is to be distributed well in time. the pre-distributed agenda should bear the title as proposed agenda. It should be finalized with the group at the beginning of the meeting. Now, imagine that the notice has been given and the meeting has also been conducted. Now, as the secretary, because you have another role also from time to time to act upon, and that is that of the secretary who will write the minutes. So, now what are the minutes? You might be thinking, what are the minutes? Minutes actually are the official records of whatsoever was transacted during the meeting. So, the elements of the minutes of meeting are date, location, duration, time of commencement and adjournment of the meeting, the names of people who are absent and present, and then the decisions or the agreements made, signatures of the secretary and the chairman. Now, the purpose of the minutes of meeting are to provide a basis for decision and action post meeting. To serve, minutes actually serve as a record. Minutes actually preserve a record of the issues discussed, and minutes can provide inputs for the agendas of subsequent meetings. So, when you are going to write the minutes as secretary, use agenda of the meeting as the framework, and then the style of writing the minutes should be impersonal and objective. One has to be very brief and concise, not giving longer explanations, and the recorder can visibly record the meeting on a flip chart or a whiteboard while the meeting is in process. In this regard, M.M. Milston, towards more effective meetings, one of his important observations is, once approved at the next meeting, the minutes can become a record that help resolve differing interpretations and remind the leader and others of commitments that have already been made. Now, you must also use markers to distinguish between the records of the decision and the records of the main point. In case you go for a vote for a resolution, please mention the name of the proposer, the seconders, and also the people who vote for and against the motion, and it is for the chairperson to ensure the prompt distribution of the meetings of the minutes. So, M.M. Milston has rightly said, and we have already discussed, that once approved at the next meeting, the minutes become a record. Now, we had also mentioned some group agreements or ground rules which actually refer to this behavioral part. We must, as a participant, also see to it that our behavior is proper, and sometimes the chairman also provides the ground rules. Discuss the understanding of points and seek approval of the group members before finalizing the ground rules. The chairperson, with the help of the facilitators, should ensure the adherence of the group to the agreed rules during the entire discussion. So, while we are seeking agreement, the chairman takes the help of the facilitator. There can be some ground rules. For example, everyone should get a chance to talk, everyone's ideas should be listened to. All these are mentioned in the beginning. Each member of the group be asked about their opinions, and then while it is done, as in all face-to-face communication, please look at the members you are talking to, and after discussion the group should agree on a group idea. Now, my dear friends, we know that we cannot survive in today's professional world without meetings, and meetings have become quite mandatory. Meetings actually provide us new ideas, it actually enriches us, it facilitates us, and it also helps us plan about future, about our vision about the days to come, and it also ensures a sort of coordination among the group members, a sort of cordiality and a commitment that we in the organization stand for the development and for the growth of the organization. So, having discussed meeting management, it is now time to understand the fact that Steve Jobs, one of the big names that you are all familiar with, says, creativity comes from spontaneous meetings. So, my dear friends, meetings are not burdensome, meetings are not troublesome, meetings actually are a sort of facilitation, it is actually a sort of support, help. So, creativity comes from spontaneous meetings, from random discussions. So, discussions are a part of life, and we must get ready to discuss once we are in a meeting. So, let us look for the next round of meetings when we shall discuss something more, something viable, something vibrant, where we can come to a proper decision, not only regarding complex ideas, but also about our visions for the future. With this, let me come to the end of this talk. Thank you very much.